Hello sword friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Brittany. For this video, I want to talk to you guys about the legendary, long anticipated, almost mythical ProGauntlets.
I'm going to start off by disclosing that this pair of ProGauntlets was provided to me by Purple Heart Armoury on loan to get my opinion. I have not been paid for this opinion, and this opinion is entirely my own.
Yes, the ProGauntlets. They are real, they do exist, and they are on my hands. These have had so much research and time put into them, and the HEMA community has been waiting forever for these. But I'm going to give you my honest opinion. Obviously, the ProGauntlets are a little bit different from all the other sort of HEMA type gloves or gauntlets that we have on the market. They're 5 fingers, meaning all of my fingers are separated individually and they are articulated. So I can move my hands pretty freely, which is one of the huge selling points for the ProGauntlets, is their mobility, their dexterity, and the ergonomic kind of comfort to it. I can do all sorts of things. I can count on my fingers here. I can thumbs up. I can do all sorts of things. And that's really awesome. And especially if you do a type of sword fighting that has grip switches and little movements in the hands and the fingers, and that's what makes these really appealing. Something to consider about the ProGauntlets is currently they're only in one size, which I'm sure if you can tell just looking at them on me, they're not my size. And that's where the problem started for me. Crossguard, who's the maker of ProGauntlet, has on their website a measuring tool for your hand, and they make it very clear that if your hand measurements don't fit this size of glove, then it might not be the best idea to purchase it right now. And I fully support that. Anybody who's interested in getting the ProGauntlet, make sure that your measurements fit this glove. Clearly, mine don't. They are gigantic on my tiny little hands. And that leads to a few problems. One of the things that can happen is when the glove is improperly fitted, and people don't consider this if the glove is too big, they usually think if it's too small, right? But if it's too big and it's improperly fitted, the force dispersion that is expected to happen on these plates doesn't actually happen the way it's supposed to. And I ended up having a few injuries. So I went out on a limb and I decided to try these in full sparring. Now, I told my students that I was going to be using these and trying them out, but what I didn't tell them is that I was going to purposefully put my hands in the way of their cuts. And I was going to fight in a way that wasn't necessarily the most defensive or considerate kind of method to keep my hands safe. Instead, I wanted to fight in a way that was more like a beginner, some type of fighting that just keeps putting the hands in the way. I'm hand parrying and I'm not really doing all the most smart things to keep my hands safe. And I think that that's something really important to consider with this kind of gear is this considered something suitable for a beginner? And in my opinion, it's maybe not the best glove for a beginner. Not unless it's fitted really well and they already know how to defend their hands super well. Incidental contacts and like little glancing blows and stuff like that, you don't really feel it very, very much. You can hear it, obviously, because it's plastic, but you know, it's not so bad. It was when I was taking direct hits to the hand for something like a hand parry, and putting my hand in the way of my head to avoid the strike, which some people do tactically and some people just do because they haven't learned how to not hand parry, but it is a common thing. That's where I started getting some pretty gnarly hand injuries. The bruising, the cuts that were happening made me maybe not want to consider this for some of my newer students who are still learning. Just not enough room for failure, and that is a concern. However, if these came in my size, I probably would have really, really liked them. And unfortunately, all of the issues that I had with the ProGauntlet were probably more based on the size issue than they were anything else. So just putting it on, my fingers, actually the way that this kind of sits in my hand, my fingertips actually go right up into the little pockets here where they're supposed to. And so that's good. So it's not necessarily that I couldn't get my fingers in all the way. I can. I can close my hand, I can do all the things, and that's perfectly fine. There's a lot of play in the plates on my fingers where they start turning, and now I've got this exposure happening on the inner glove. I really do hope that ProGauntlet ends up offering smaller sizes. By the sounds of it, they've been taking in measurements, and you can go on their website, and when you put in the hand measurements, if it doesn't fit you, apparently they're drawing in all that information to be able to decide what sizes to make in the future. And I really hope that they do a small enough size for me. I've always had trouble with finding hand protection that actually does fit. I currently use Spez Heavies, and even that is they're gigantic. But one of the benefits is the ergonomics. I can do all sorts of switches. If I want to, I can snap my fingers. I don't know how interesting that is to anybody who does HEMA, but it's definitely ergonomic. It's quite comfortable. I don't feel like I really had to fight the glove very much in order to do my techniques.
Good.
There are some points where you can make adjustments. There's this wrist strap here. You can see it opens up. I can have it quite loose and open, or I can tighten it up a little bit, close it out on the wrist, and make it just a little bit snugger right here, which is nice because now I'm not having this gigantic gauntlet taking up all this space. And the gloves themselves, these ProGauntlets, are very low profile compared to something like a Spez Heavy, for example. You can tell that they've actually put in a lot of thought for some of the potential points of weakness. Now you'll notice here in the fingers, if you pull back this little flap here, they've actually tried to close out the gaps in between the fingers. So what would normally sit right here, especially with 5-finger gloves, it's when the hand spreads out that's where those points, like thrusts and stuff and things like that, can actually probably hurt the hand, and they've managed to close those out pretty good. At no point did I end up taking any crazy weird hand injuries, even though, and we tried, that ended up being on open points. So you can see even in the webbing of the hand here, they've locked that out, they've closed that out with a plate to try and prevent any rogue points getting in there and actually tearing through the underglove. When the hand is actually closed on the sword itself, it's actually very well protected. There's no gaps here in the webbing of the hand. Even the side here is very well closed out, and the plates here roll around the side of the hand, which ends up being very protective, and that's what I really like about these, is they do a great job on that level. So overall, I'm actually really impressed with these ProGauntlets. The amount of thought and consideration, research and development that went into these pieces of gear is really quite impressive. You can tell that they really did try to cover as much as possible on the hand and try to lock out any weaknesses and weak points, and that's really excellent. The articulation is awesome. The mobility is great. And some of the points that people don't realize is not only is it articulated in each joint of the finger, which does make that very appealing as a 5-finger glove, but it has this side mobility here where the plate, I'll show you, actually can move around here on the thumb. So the thumb mobility is very, very good, and it's not restricted really in any way. You also have a little bit of give here at the knuckles, which is really nice too. Where they didn't work out so much for me was taking strikes right into these individual plates on the articulated fingers. And again, that's probably because my hands are so small that the plates aren't seated correctly, and there's just too much play. They can turn a lot and expose the hand, and that's just because my hands are so small. So I did end up with some hand injuries based on putting my hands in danger, obviously.
So to test these gloves out, I put my hands in unsafe positions, like you can see here. We'll watch this again a little bit slower, and you can see how my partner here ends up hitting my hands right there. Now, even though I'm able to counter it, it still didn't put me in a very safe position, and doing this for several sparring rounds left me with a few hand injuries. I just want to reiterate that even though these hand injuries did happen, they were caused because of my intentional and deliberate choice to put my hands in the way of strikes with a steel longsword that were done in earnest. That, coupled with a ill-fitting or poorly sized glove on my part, ends up putting myself at higher risk than I think most people would be if they purchased the ProGauntlet.
If you're considering purchasing the ProGauntlet, please do your research. Get on the website, put in your hand measurements, make sure that this glove, or at least the size options that they have available, will work for you. Improperly fitted gear is dangerous. That's just a fact. So make sure you get stuff that actually fits you. And even though the ProGauntlets are super cool, they've put a lot of thought and time into it, make sure that this piece of equipment is going to work for you, especially when it comes to hand protection. Hand breaks, finger breaks, things like that used to be a lot more common in HEMA. I don't want to see it become more common again. So with that, I want to say thank you to Purple Heart Armoury for loaning me this pair of ProGauntlets. They let me keep it for several weeks. I got to do a lot of sparring. I did longsword, sword and buckler, all sorts of things. Definitely going to hold out on a pair that's maybe closer to my size. But otherwise, thank you so much, Purple Heart, for letting me borrow these. Crossguard, always appreciate the amount of effort that you guys have put into this. It was definitely worth the wait. And thank you to you guys for sticking around, watching the video. If you have questions or opinions, you know where to find me.